What kind of man would set fire to his own villages, just to starve, confuse, and demoralize an invading army? In the spring of 1462, Mehmed II, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire and conqueror of Constantinople, launched a military campaign into Wallachia to crush the resistance of Vlad III, voivode of Wallachia, known to history as Vlad III, or Vlad the Impaler. When Sultan Mehmed's huge army crossed into Wallachia, they expected to find towns full of people and supplies. Instead, they found empty villages and burned farms. Vlad had ordered his people to destroy everything before the enemy arrived. Houses were set on fire, food stores were emptied or burned, and animals were killed or taken away. Wells were poisoned so the Ottoman soldiers couldn't drink clean water. This wasn't just random destruction. Vlad knew his army was much smaller than the Sultan's force of 90,000 men. He couldn't win a normal battle, so he made the land itself fight against the invaders. When Ottoman soldiers entered Wallachia, they found no food to eat, no water to drink, and no shelter from the weather. Local people had either run away or been killed, so there was nobody to give the enemy soldiers directions or information. Vlad wrote a letter to the King of Hungary explaining what he had done. He said he had killed everyone in the path of the Ottoman army, including men, women, old people, and children. He burned down entire villages and towns. This letter still exists today in Hungarian records, proving that Vlad was proud of these harsh actions. The plan worked perfectly. The Ottoman soldiers got sick and hungry as they marched through the empty wasteland. Many became scared and ran away from the army. They had never faced this kind of warfare before. Instead of fighting battles, they were slowly dying from hunger, thirst, and disease. The Sultan's mighty army was falling apart without even fighting a real battle. But Vlad wasn't finished with his psychological warfare. When the Ottoman forces finally reached the main fortresses of Wallachia, they saw something that shocked even hardened warriors. Outside the gates of important cities like Targoviste, thousands of wooden stakes had been planted in the ground. On top of these stakes were the bodies of Ottoman soldiers, diplomats, and spies who had been captured earlier. These weren't just random killings. Vlad had carefully arranged the bodies in neat rows, like a forest of death. Some of the bodies belonged to important Ottoman messengers who had come to negotiate before the war started. According to old records, these diplomats had refused to take off their turbans when meeting Vlad, saying it was against their religion. Vlad got angry and ordered his men to nail the turbans to their heads permanently before putting them on stakes. The sight was so terrible that even Sultan Mehmed, who had conquered many cities and seen lots of violence, was disturbed. Ottoman writers who were there during the campaign wrote that the Sultan stopped his army's advance when he saw the field of impaled bodies. Some soldiers became so frightened that they refused to continue fighting. Impalement was Vlad's favorite method of execution and torture. While other rulers used this punishment sometimes, Vlad used it on a scale that nobody had ever seen before. The process was designed to be as horrible as possible. A long wooden stake was pushed through the victim's body, usually starting from the bottom and coming out through the chest or shoulders. The person stayed alive on the stake for hours or even days before dying. Vlad's men were trained to arrange the impaled bodies in specific patterns and heights. Foreign visitors described seeing entire forests of dead bodies on stakes. The most famous example happened in 1462 when approximately 20,000 people were impaled outside Targoviste as Sultan Mehmed approached the city. Most of these were Ottoman prisoners, but some were Wallachian people who Vlad thought had betrayed him. But Vlad didn't just kill his enemies. He also used a cruel tactic of mutilating some Ottoman prisoners and then releasing them. These survivors weren't spared out of kindness. Instead, they were turned into living warnings for the Sultan. Vlad's men would cut off their noses, ears, or fingers. They would blind them or cut off their hands and feet. Some prisoners were branded with hot metal or had symbols carved into their skin. These mutilated prisoners were then sent back to the Ottoman army. When other soldiers saw what had happened to their comrades, they became terrified. The sight of these disfigured men was worse than hearing about deaths, because they could see exactly what Vlad was capable of doing. It was a message written in flesh and blood rather than on paper. This strategy was particularly insulting to Sultan Mehmed, who was used to being treated with great respect. By sending back prisoners in such a horrible condition, Vlad was showing that he wasn't afraid of the mighty Ottoman Empire. He was making it clear that he would rather destroy everything, including his own people and land, than surrender to foreign rule. The psychological impact of these tactics was enormous. Ottoman soldiers, who were usually brave and disciplined, began to fear entering Wallachian territory. They knew that if they were captured, they might face a fate worse than death. Some historians believe that Vlad's terror tactics were so effective that they influenced how other European rulers fought against the Ottomans in later years. Vlad used impalement not just during wartime, but also to control his own people. He would execute Wallachian citizens for crimes like stealing, lying, or being lazy. According to old chronicles, he once impaled a woman simply for lying about her husband's work. He believed that extreme punishments would create a perfectly ordered society where nobody would dare to break the law. To his enemies, Vlad was a monster who used unimaginable cruelty. But to his supporters, he was a strong leader who protected Wallachia from foreign invasion. He turned terror into a weapon of war and used fear to control both his enemies and his own people. His methods were brutal, but they worked. Even Sultan Mehmed, one of the most powerful rulers of his time, eventually decided that conquering Wallachia wasn't worth the cost. The legacy of Vlad's tactics extended far beyond his own lifetime. His use of psychological warfare and terror became legendary throughout Europe and the Ottoman Empire. Stories about the Impaler spread across the continent, inspiring both fear and fascination. Some people saw him as a hero who defended Christianity against Islamic invasion, while others viewed him as a cruel tyrant who went too far in his methods. What made Vlad's approach so effective was its combination of practical military strategy and psychological manipulation. By destroying the countryside, he denied the enemy army the supplies they needed to survive. By displaying impaled bodies, he created fear that weakened enemy morale. By mutilating and releasing prisoners, he spread terror throughout the Ottoman ranks. Each tactic reinforced the others, creating a comprehensive system of warfare based on fear rather than traditional military strength. In the end, Vlad's resistance forced Sultan Mehmed to withdraw from Wallachia, at least temporarily. The great conqueror of Constantinople had been stopped by a much smaller force using unconventional tactics. This showed other European rulers that the Ottoman Empire could be resisted, even by small countries, if they were willing to use extreme methods. The question remains, which of Vlad's tactics was most effective in undermining Ottoman morale? Was it the scorched earth policy that starved and exhausted the army? The forests of impaled bodies that created psychological terror? Or the mutilated survivors who carried fear back to their own forces? Perhaps it was the combination of all these methods that made Vlad's resistance so successful and so memorable in history.